none of that recorded. Okay, so this is design thinking and brainstorming techniques. This is going to sort of be an introduction to the creative process slash design thinking slash creative problem solving for your everyday life. There's definitely useful skills that you will take learning the creative process for graphic design that you can apply to really any complex problem in your everyday life. So here we go. All right, so design thinking. Design isn't just the end product, like a nicely designed poster, but it's also a process. And design thinking is the process that we use to solve complex problems. So these could be visual communications problems, but the spirit of design thinking also challenges more conventional thinking and leads to more innovation in any sort of problem. All right, and I have tweaked the design thinking model to more closely use the language and the terminology that we use in graphic design. So the 5 steps are empathize, define, brainstorm, design, and then review. So we're going to talk about what each of those steps are talking about. Okay, so empathize is our first step. So empathy sets the foundation for human-centered design. It begins by focusing on the people that you're trying to design for to ensure that your design solution definitely conceives and executes a design that meets all of their needs and desires. I'm sure you've heard the term target audience when talking about advertising and marketing. Target audience is really, and empathizing is really just being able to put yourself in your audience's shoes and understand from their point of view what their challenges are. So there are 3 traits of empathy: observe, engage, and immerse. Observe, watch people and note their behavior in the context of how they do things in their lives and how they interact with their surroundings and others. Engage, become involved by interviewing and interacting with users through planned or unexpected encounters. Think like focus groups, on the street interviews, that kind of stuff. Those like hideous Chevy commercials. Engaging. Immerse would be experience what your users experience, their challenges, their thought processes, and so forth to better understand them. In like a business field, or if you're working in a design agency, there is a whole group of people whose job it is to conduct this type of research and bring back target audience insights and this different sort of empathy research to the creative team, to you as the designer. But if you're ever working on your own, or you're still given some of this research, but you just can't quite connect to it and internalize it, it's really important to understand that you need to try to put yourself in those people's shoes, to try to employ some empathy to understand why they're having whatever visual problem they're having or other problem that they're having so that you can best solve for it. Maybe like an easy example of how this would make sense would be you're at a design firm and you're tasked with creating a new wayfinding system through the Forest Park campus because students complain that all the buildings look the same. It's kind of confusing and intimidating when you get to campus and they need help. So you could definitely go sit out in the quad area and watch people wander around from building to building. You could engage students, right? You could stop them amidst them walking between classes and ask them, how they felt when they first came to campus. Where did they get confused? What would they have liked to have seen? And then you can definitely immerse yourself in that experience, right? You could go get a fake schedule and try to find your various buildings in a limited amount of time between classes and start to experience those same pain points that actual students experience. So those points of empathy would help you to better understand how should we design and what should we design to aid in this wayfinding issue. Are we going to design better signage to put around campus? Are we going to design a mobile app that has a GPS tracker to help people literally like walk their path from building to building? What are some other creative solutions that we could come up with to help students get to classes and feel less intimidated when they walk on campus? Okay, so those last few points where I came up with a couple ideas and I started to define the problem, that is your next step of this creative process. Define. While your empathy findings inform your thinking and your point of view, this defining stage helps guide your exploration. It gives you focus and it's a reference for evaluating your ideas. So once you define your problem, our problem is incoming students are overwhelmed and confused getting from class to class. Once we write that down, now we have something very substantial to reference back to when we think about our different solutions and our different ideas going to be helpful to our target audience. So we can compare our ideas to our defined problem. All right, so different points of the define process. You should write down a summary about your audience. So everything you've read, all of the target audience research that you received, everything you kind of gathered from your empathizing exercises, you're going to summarize it basically. Write down who your target audience is. Who are they? What motivates them? How does your creative problem and your audience intersect? And what do they have in common? So again, we're kind of like sitting back, we're reflecting on all the information that we've taken in and we've internalized it, and now we're like exporting it back out in this defined sense. It can literally be writing these things down in your sketchbook just so you have a baseline to start from when coming up with brainstorming ideas and coming up with visual solutions to your problem. Okay, so then the next stage is brainstorm. Okay, so now we're going to explore various lines of thinking. We're going to generate a bunch of ideas, which are called concepts, and we're going to think past the obvious and try to form as many ideas as possible. So you've heard me say this a few times now in our brainstorming parts of our activities. We're not going to judge our ideas. We're just going to come up with as many ideas as we can think of, and we will judge them later, right? So you're trying to go beyond pedestrian ideas, think past the obvious. I think you've now started to see through some of our brainstorming activities, those first few ideas, everybody has those ideas. Those are not novel. Those are not unique. That's not what people are going to pay you for. They're going to pay you for the deeper ideas, the better thinking, the less obvious solutions. So we're going to come up with a whole lot of ideas. And we've done it a few different ways in class already. We've done things where we've set timers, where I've challenged you to think about one problem for a long duration of time. We've done it where we've like peppered different ideas out real quick with each other. And there are a bunch of different ways you could brainstorm, and it's really going to be about you each understanding what works best for you. But I'm just going to kind of give you a few more general brainstorming ideas that are just, good ones to kind of get you started. So you could do a brain dump. This is when you set a timer for 20 or 30 minutes and you just write down everything that comes into your head. It could be words, it could be pictures. Pretty much, this is like a nice place to start. You've internalized all this information, you've defined your problem, you probably have a few quick ideas that just immediately came to you. This is your chance to get them out of your head, basically. Just write them down, clear your head, get all the low-hanging fruit down, write it down so you can move on. It's almost like a shopping list. You could write down just like other words or phrases that come to your mind, whatever you can think of. Just kind of sit there thinking about your problem for 20 or 30 minutes and write down everything that comes into your head. Next one is a mind map. This is a really pretty mind map example, but it's really just a place where you put your initial problem or concept in the center of the page, and then you start writing words around it. It's sort of like the brain dump, except now you're trying to think past each level of word. All right, so this is really just a way to visually organize your ideas and kind of get more complex thoughts. So after you write down your initial concept or the problem that you want to tackle in the center of the page, you start to add some words that directly relate to that problem around it. And then once you run out of that level of thinking, then you can try to create additional words or thoughts that relate to that first set of words you wrote around your circle. So those are kind of how you create different branches of the mind map. And you kind of keep going to see how far out you can keep coming up with different ideas that relate to things you've already written down. After you've kind of gone through this mind map, you set yourself a timer again, see how long you can, see if you can do it for 45 minutes or for an hour. Then you can kind of go back through and reread your mind map and start to draw some connections and start to see, like, have you repeated yourself a few times, circle the ideas that kind of are most interesting, and take those pieces that you can kind of take into the sketching phase. So this is, again, a really pretty version of a mind map, but you can kind of see how the main problem was how to focus in the age of distraction, which is very relevant, right? And then you can sort of see how the main thoughts that this person had were starting with the bottom right purple and going clockwise. Take time to reflect and review. Help for addicts. Take a digital technology detox. Manage your space. How to work. Creating rituals and habits. And managing email. And from each of those branches, which you can see this one is nicely color-coded, which makes it easier for you to follow, you can sort of see how they've come up with different strategies or different ideas that relate to those large bucket ideas. And that's how it sort of becomes a map or like a web out. Okay, so one of my favorite brainstorming techniques is to sleep on it. This sounds like a cop-out, but it's actually a really good part of your process, so you shouldn't discount it. Basically, after you've been struggling with an idea all day, you've been thinking about it for a while, you've sort of hit a mental roadblock, there is no shame in just giving up, going watching a movie or whatever, and going to bed. So you might be surprised, like, how often do you wake up in the morning and you're like, have a great idea, right? Or you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a great idea. So there's science has proven it that, if you kind of spend a few minutes right before you go to bed, like rehashing where you are with this creative process, with your creative problem, and then you fall asleep thinking about your problem, sometimes your brain will the subconscious will start to process what you've been working on, and when you wake up, you'll have a great idea, or you wake up in the night with a great idea. So there's nothing wrong with that. I often find that the next morning, I'm getting ready and all of a sudden or driving to work, and everything that I was unclear about the last day makes sense, and I have like a clear idea of what I want to do. So definitely, this is a long process. Brainstorming, creative process. It doesn't all happen, in an hour or two. It takes a few days or a few weeks to really hone in on the right solution. So don't fret. Okay. This next one is mood boards. I think mood boards are a really great one for us as graphic designers because we're visual people. mood board just means you're going to gather a bunch of disparate visual images and typefaces and colors and textures and images and photographs, just a whole bunch of different things that are going to be your inspiration to the overall project. These are really great for trying to define a certain style that you want to go for, or you kind of have a style in mind, but you're not sure how to execute it. There is no shame. There is only benefits in looking at what other people have done and gathering in visual inspiration. So you can use a Pinterest board. Pinterest is a great tool. Digital boards, collage boards. Back in the day, we would literally just cut things out of magazines or cut things out, take pictures of things you've seen, and make a collage on a corkboard. You could download images off of Google Images or Pinterest and just make a folder. And then you can make a contact sheet in Photoshop. So there's a lot of different ways to just make a visual collage. It doesn't have to be organized. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody but you. It's just kind of a place to hone in on, especially if there's certain like characteristics or stylistic direction you want to take a project. This kind of gives all of your visual inspiration in one place where you can easily go back and reference it as you move through the design phase. Here's an example of a mood board. I would say this project, someone was looking at like definitely like hot and cold colors. It's sort of graphic. I would say it's more masculine than feminine. So these are just different feelings I get from looking at this collection of things they put together. You can see there's some logos in here, there's some type choices, there's some visuals, some color swatches, there's all kinds of things. Okay, sorry. All right, so we're going to start off with our rough thumbnail sketches. Again, you're looking to just put as many ideas down on paper as possible. And then from there, we usually go back through, you review your sketches, you pick out the couple that you think are most interesting and worth pursuing. And then you create refined sketches off of those. From there, we are going to move to the computer and you end up making computer compositions and then refining those compositions and then selecting one to continue refining and take to the final product. But this design phase definitely encompasses all these different stages of design. And we move through the design phase until we ultimately end up with a finished result that you / your client / everyone is satisfied with. So the design phase definitely works tandem with the review phase. So review is iterative, it's informing the next round of design. So you kind of jump back and forth between design and review a bunch of times until you finally find the final design. But the review stage is really just about stepping back, taking the opportunity to assess your design solution, get feedback like via critiques or creative meetings, and you're really reviewing your design against that initial, what you initially defined as your problem. So way back in step 2, that define stage, what you wrote there is what you are comparing these designs to. Are you solving the problem as you defined it? And of course, review stage is always where you're going to find room for improvement. If you're working on like a website or a game, this review stage is also where you would do like user function testing, figure out like make sure your website design is intuitive, people know where to go, and all of that real world testing as well. So there you go. That is the whole creative process broken down into this design thinking model. So it was empathize, define, brainstorm, review, design, review. Design, review, design, review, design, review. Lots of designing and reviewing. So I hope that kind of helped articulate what we've been doing in class into very definitive buckets. You'll spend more and less time in these different stages depending on the product or the project that you're working on. But I think it's important to understand that these 5 stages definitely happen with every creative project. You might not spend, more than a few minutes in empathize and define because it might have already been done for you, or it might be a very clear project that you've been asked to do where there's not a lot of guessing in the front half of it. And there are other projects where you might spend months trying to really define the problem and come up with ideas and brainstorming before you even put any sort of initial designs on paper. So it really depends on which part of design and graphic design you get into, as well as what the problem is that you've been presented. So it's important to understand all of these stages so that you can work through your full creative process and end up with the best results possible. All right, thank you guys, and enjoy the movie.